Hello again, I'm Peter Holmes and this is Dfpkt Pod 2. Now, just to recap, in Pod 1 I looked at definition and abstract things and tried to set out my ideas, my approach. And in this second part, Pod 2, I'm going to go on to talk about facts and propositions, and also to begin applying my ideas to one of the thorny issues in philosophy, in epistemology particularly, and that's the idea of knowledge being justified true belief. It's one of the major debates in philosophy. But anyway, here is DFPKT Pod 2, Chapter 4, Facts. Now, we can use the word fact to mean state of affairs. I prefer the expression feature of reality, and I'll explain more about that later. But we also think of facts as things that are true. And the following definition of the noun fact demonstrates the two different meanings. Now, this is from the Concise Oxford Dictionary again, 9th edition, page 482. There's a bit of more scholarly apparatus. Here's the definition of the word fact. A thing that is known to have occurred, to exist, or to be true. Now, if a fact is a feature of reality outside language, then it has no truth value. Such a feature of reality and the things that constitute it just are or were neither true nor false. And such features of reality can often be known and shown to be or have been the case. So just to remind you, I'm going back here to the first two of my three-part taxonomy: features of reality and things that we can know about them. But if instead a fact is a thing that is true, which is what the definition also said, then the only thing it can be is an assertion, typically a linguistic expression, because given the meaning of the word true in that definition I've just read out, only assertions can be true or false. I'll just add here that we can leave aside other uses of the words true and false, such as in a true scholar or a false knave. Now, of course, linguistic expressions are themselves real things, features of reality, such as sequences of sounds, marks on paper or screen, or signing gestures. But assertions are the only features of reality that can have truth value. So, we use the word fact in two completely different ways, to mean a feature of reality or a description of a feature of reality. And while dual and even multiple word uses are not uncommon in English as in all languages, I think this example is highly significant. We can mistake what we say about things for the way things are, a description for the described. And the way we ordinarily use the word fact both demonstrates and maintains the mistake. In effect, we can conflate the two meanings of the word fact, so that the description and the described seem to be one and the same thing. And in practice, this is what usually happens. If asked to identify a fact, what we actually do is produce an assertion that describes a feature of reality, given the way we use the words or other signs involved. Now, if you disagree, try identifying a fact that is not an assertion of some kind. If you point at it, which fact are you pointing at? For this reason, I define a fact as description as a true factual assertion. Factual because it claims something about reality that may or may not be or have been the case, and true because what it claims is or was indeed the case. So, just to point out, a factual assertion may be true or false. Now, one advantage of using the expression factual assertion is that it allows us to distinguish between factual assertions, which have truth value, true or false, and non-factual assertions which do not. For example, moral and aesthetic assertions are non-factual because they express judgments or opinions rather than make factual claims with truth value, true or false. Now, as you may be aware, I'm straying in saying this about moral and aesthetic assertions into a minefield in philosophy to do with the nature, particularly, of morality. In other words, when we make a moral assertion such as this is morally wrong, are we making a factual statement with a truth value, or are we expressing an opinion, which is not factual, okay? And I'll just put in here that I discuss the non-factual nature of moral assertions in Arguments Against Moral Objectivism, which I include in the collection of papers that I mentioned last time, Philosophical Papers, which is available on Amazon. But let me just sum up. In short, I think it's demonstrable that moral assertions do not make factual claims with truth value, that there can be no moral facts, but only moral value judgments, and that attempts by moral realists and objectivists to demonstrate the existence of moral facts are unsuccessful. But the debate goes on, and I digress. What we call objectivity is independence from opinion when considering the facts. So, in that definition, that there are facts is a given. And this is why it matters to be clear about what we mean when we talk about facts and objectivity. Chapter 5 then, to move on. Propositions. Aiming for clarity, many philosophers distinguish between features of reality, which they may call facts, and often do, and things said about them, which they call propositions. And this would be a useful distinction were it not for the problem of what a proposition is supposed to be. Now, I'll just break off here and point out something. The reason why I prefer the expression factual assertion and non-factual assertion to the expression proposition is that with factual and non-factual assertion, you can actually make the distinction between the two kinds of assertion. So that it's actually clearer, given that you can do that, than to call something a proposition. If you say something is a proposition, you're not actually making any claim about whether it's factual or non-factual, and I think that's terribly important. Point is this, though, what is a proposition? What do philosophers mean when they talk about propositions? A proposition is supposedly what a statement states, an assertion asserts, a declarative declares, a claim claims, and so on. So a proposition is supposedly an abstract thing, which can be embodied, expressed, or represented by different so-called token sentences, which are real things. But, as you may remember from Pod 1, the point is this. Though ancient and pervasive, belief that abstract things exist is irrational, and that usually we do not also speculate about the abstract things expressed by other clause forms, the things that questions ask, commands command, and exclamations exclaim, points to the strangeness of thinking that what a declarative declares is an abstract thing of some kind. Now, I'll just break off there. You may be perhaps unfamiliar with this grammatical language, but there are, in many kinds of analysis, grammatical analysis, there are 4 clause forms: declarative, exclamative, interrogative, and imperative. You know, the 4 kinds of clause forms they're called. And my point is this, that we don't seem to bother about what an exclamation exclaims, and yet we do bother and care about what a declarative declares, and that's an indication that we just don't need to. Anyway, this is the point. Like other abstract things, propositions are misleading fictions. We mistake the abstract noun proposition for a thing of some kind that can be described. But propositions supposedly consist of subjects and predicates. And again, this is grammar jargon. This is the traditional two parts of any clause, a subject and a predicate. Propositions supposedly consist of subjects and predicates. And some are true or false, because they describe features of reality that may or may not be or have been the case. So propositions, and this is my point, are just like real declarative sentences. And a symbolic representation of a proposition is nothing more than another linguistic expression, a codified translation. The so-called logical form of an assertion is just another assertion. Now, I'm straying there into something which you may not be familiar with, but I suppose you could call it symbolic logic. What logicians do is analyse what they call the logical form and reduce it down to, often using symbols and letters to as it were, explain the structure of the thing. But though propositions are merely linguistic expressions, they have played an ambiguous role in philosophy, similar to the role played by facts in everyday language. So this is the balance, if you like, the connection I'm trying to make. And I call this phenomenon the myth of propositions. The myth is so potent that knowledge of features of reality has been called propositional knowledge. For example, omniscience, which means knowing everything, has been defined as knowledge of all true propositions, as though knowing everything is identical to knowing all true assertions about everything. And by extension, there has even been talk of propositional belief. But propositions are just linguistic assertions that we can use to express beliefs and knowledge claims. Outside language, there is nothing propositional about the existence and nature of things. Now, I'm going to say that again. Outside language, there is nothing propositional about the existence and nature of things. Talk of propositional belief and propositional knowledge conflates what we believe and know about features of reality with what we say about them. And that's the muddle I was referring to in the last pod. And this confusion is evident in the widely used definition of knowledge as justified true belief, along with Gettyer's criticism of the definition. Okay, so just to draw a line there for a second, I've looked at facts and propositions, applying the ideas in the first pod, and importantly, I suppose most importantly, pointing out the crucial nature of the distinction we have to make, I think, between what we believe and know and what we say. And what we say is bound up in the business of what a fact and a proposition is. Anyway, now I'm going to go on to something I just touched on there, and this is to apply the ideas I've been developing, as I said, to a particular issue in philosophy, and particularly, obviously, epistemology, because it's about knowledge, this is chapter 6. I'll read it and get into it, and then perhaps explain some more as I go along. So this is more of a specialised thing in philosophy, but I hope I've explained it in a way that even if you're not familiar with these ideas, you can follow. Chapter 6 then. Knowledge as justified true belief, brackets, JTB. So I'm going to be using JTB, the abbreviation, which is the one that's widely used in the literature. It's called the JTB theory of knowledge. Okay, what is knowledge? Knowledge is justified true belief. That's the idea of the doctrine. So here we go. According to the JTB definition, the three necessary and jointly sufficient conditions for knowledge are truth, belief, and justification for the belief. And in one version of the definition, because there are many, the so-called truth condition, which is one of them, is as follows. And I'm quoting this from the analysis of knowledge at the Stanford website, knowledge analysis. The Stanford have produced a fantastic dictionary of philosophy, which many people use worldwide. And if you type in knowledge or JTB, you'll see this definition of knowledge. So there are three conditions: truth, belief, and justification for the belief. So I'm looking particularly here at the first condition. It's called the truth condition. So I'll read it out to you, and I'll try to explain this as clearly as I can. So here is the truth condition, according to Stanford. S knows that P, if and only if P is true. I'll say that again. S knows that P, if and only if P is true. Now, just to explain those letters, S is, if you like, short for subject or a person, and therefore any person. So the idea is a generalizing statement. In other words, a person knows that P, if and only if P is true. The word P there, the letter P, I'm sorry, stands for proposition. Okay? One more time then, because I'm going to unpack this now, because I hope perhaps you're beginning to see the problem that's going on here. S knows that P, if and only if P is true. So this is my argument about that. The proposition P has two different functions in this definition. The second P is an assertion with a truth value, if and only if P is true. But the first P seems somehow to be the feature of reality that the second P asserts. S knows that P, if and only if P is true. The first P is a description of a feature of reality, okay? So the proposition P is both the thing described, the feature of reality, and the description, just as we use the word fact to mean a feature of reality and a description of a feature of reality. So my point is that the proposition has the same problem as the fact. In other words, there are two different things we're talking about, which we can conflate and muddle up. Now, just to point out here that I analysed the JTB definition of knowledge more fully in a paper I call Justified True Belief, Knowledge and the Myth of Propositions, which I include in the collection Philosophical Papers. The JTB definition casually identifies a feature of reality with a proposition. And its truth condition is that we can know something is the case only if an assertion asserting it is true. An absurd idea derived from the myth of propositions. It gets things back to front. And the confusion deepens. The justified true belief definition includes truth as a necessary condition for knowledge. But in this context, the only things that can be true or false are factual assertions. So the expression true belief is another grammatical misattribution, rather like the expression abstract noun, which I looked at earlier in the first pod. As an acceptable shorthand, and I have to concede this, as an acceptable shorthand, we do use the expressions true belief and false belief, and ordinarily their meanings are clear. But to believe something is to accept it, just as to disbelieve it is to withhold acceptance or to reject it. And my point is this: neither acceptance nor rejection has a truth value. Only factual assertions are true or false. So, in the expression true belief, The modifier, adjective true, does not refer to the noun belief. It actually refers to an unstated factual assertion. Simply believing or accepting that a feature of reality is or was the case, as in the JTB definition, believing that P, has nothing to do with truth or falsehood, because it has nothing to do with language whatsoever. The distinction between knowledge by acquaintance and knowledge by description may be useful. And just to say, I'm referring here mainly to Bertrand Russell's distinction in his discussion of knowledge. He said there are two kinds, or there are two and maybe more. There's actually knowledge by acquaintance and knowledge by description. May be useful. But knowledge by description, this is my point, can only be knowledge by acquaintance with the description. And I think it unlikely we would call this descriptive knowledge or declarative knowledge. These are as muddled as the expression propositional knowledge. Okay, I hope that was all right. The JTB is, as I say, a big issue in philosophy. Is knowledge justified true belief? Justified true belief? Do we have to explain what the thing knowledge is? But can I remind you to go back to my point previously, which I think is incredibly important. The abstract noun knowledge is not the name of a thing that we can describe. Okay, so this debate about the nature of knowledge, which is Platonic or Socratic, it goes back that far and even further. And has been raging ever since then, and will always rage, comes from this mistaken idea that knowledge is a thing that can be described. All we can do, as I'm going to go on to argue, is explain how we do or could use the word knowledge, its cognates like know and knowing and so on, and related words such as ignorance. And there's nothing left over. Okay, thanks very much. I hope that made sense and you enjoyed it. I hope you'll come back again for Pod 3.